had documented 47 species going to war. Each time the pattern remained the same: fear in their eyes, chaos in their ranks, desperation in their movements. War was biology's last resort, the thing creatures did when all other options died. That's what believed until the humans. The collective sent to Earth with a simple mission: document the species joining the Galactic Council, record their military capabilities, write another chapter in the great chronicle of warfare that people had maintained for 3,000 years. Simple work, routine work. Ship landed in what humans called Sol. The city sprawled beneath a yellow sun, full of lights and noise and movement. Millions of humans going about their lives. They looked fragile, soft skin. No natural armor, no claws, no venom, made notes. These creatures seemed poorly designed for violence. A human waited at the landing platform. He wore a military uniform, dark blue with silver markings. He smiled when emerged from the ship. "Welcome to Earth," the human said. "I'm Minyu. I'll be your liaison during your stay." Studied him. Minyu stood relaxed, hands clasped behind his back. His voice was calm, polite. Nothing about him suggested warrior instincts. Perhaps humans were diplomats, not fighters. Perhaps this assignment would be easier than expected. "I require access to your military archives," said, "and permission to observe your forces." "Of course," Minyu said, "is waiting for us. She's our military historian. She'll help you find whatever you need." They traveled through the city in a ground vehicle, watched humans everywhere, walking, talking, laughing. Children played in parks. Elderly humans sat on benches feeding birds. This was a species at peace with itself. Met them at a massive building humans called the War Memorial. She was smaller than Minyu, with dark hair pulled back from her face. She wore civilian clothes, not military uniform. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent. 47 species, said after Minyu introduced them. "That's impressive. You've seen a lot of war." "War is universal," replied. "All species fight when survival demands it." "Survival," repeated. She smiled, but something in that smile made translation implant uncertain. "Yes, humans know about fighting for survival. Come, I'll show you our archives." The archives were vast. Digital records spanning thousands of years. Began reviewing them and confusion set in immediately. Human military protocols made no sense. Before battles, they sang songs. They carried photographs of family members. They gave names to their weapons, their vehicles, even their ships. They painted symbols on everything. "Why do they do this?" asked, pointing to an image of soldiers with writing on their helmets. "It reminds them who they are," said. "War is easier when you forget you're a person. Humans don't want it to be easier." "Didn't understand. War should be efficient, clean. Why would any species make it harder for themselves?" "How long has your species been at war?" asked. "Always," said simply. "For our entire recorded history, humans have been fighting. Against invasion, against conquest. Against each other," said. "We spent thousands of years at war with ourselves. We're good at it, very good." Felt the first touch of unease. A species that fought itself for thousands of years and survived had learned something, something important. The alarm came 3 days later. Was reviewing footage of human naval battles when Minyu entered the archive room. His expression had changed. The casual politeness was gone. His face was hard now, focused. "The Ken swarm broke the treaty," Minyu said. "They're invading the frontier worlds. The Council is calling all member species to respond." Knew the Ken. Aggressive, numerous. They attacked in overwhelming swarms, using numbers to crush resistance. 42 colonies had fallen to them in the last century before the treaty. "Your military will mobilize?" asked. "Already happening," Minyu said. "Would you like to observe?" This was perfect. Would see humans under pressure, see how they responded to crisis. Every species showed their true nature when war came. They traveled to a military base outside the city, expected chaos, panic, the frantic energy of a species scrambling to prepare. Instead, the base was quiet, almost eerily quiet. Soldiers moved with purpose but not haste. They checked equipment methodically. They loaded supplies in organized lines. Officers spoke in normal tones, giving orders that others followed without question. There was no shouting, no running, no fear. Watched a young soldier named sitting with his squad. They were checking their weapons, but they were also laughing, actually laughing. Said something translator rendered as a joke, and the others smiled. They don't seem concerned, observed. They're concerned, Minyu said. They're just professional. Professional, repeated. They're going to war, beings will die, they know this. Of course they know, Minyu said. He watched squad. That's why they're laughing now, while they still can. Made more notes. Human psychology was strange, contradictory. They joked in the face of danger. They prepared for death while acting alive. Nothing about them matched the patterns new. The fleet would depart in 12 hours, had permission to travel with them, to observe humans in actual combat, to finally understand what this species was. But standing in that quiet base, watching soldiers laugh and check weapons and move with calm certainty, felt something new. Something had never felt in 47 previous documentations. Felt curious. What happened when you pushed a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting war against itself? And beneath that curiosity, very faint, very small, felt the first whisper of fear. The human fleet departed exactly on schedule, watched from the observation deck of the flagship as Earth shrank behind them. 30 warships, 10 support vessels, 20,000 human soldiers heading toward war. Noticed something odd immediately. The cargo manifests included items that made no tactical sense. Musical instruments, physical books, seeds for plants, personal items. One ship carried nothing but what humans called comfort supplies. "Why bring these things?" asked Admiral. The Admiral was an older human, his hair gray, his face lined with years. He commanded the fleet with the same quiet efficiency had seen at the base. "We prepare for war," said, "but we don't become war. Those things remind us who we are, what we're protecting. They take up space, weight, resources." "Yes," agreed, "but morale is a resource too, maybe the most important one." Didn't understand. Morale was not measurable. It appeared on no tactical display. How could it be important? The journey to the frontier would take 8 weeks. Most species would use sleep for such a long voyage, save energy, preserve resources, arrive fresh. Assumed humans would do the same. They didn't. Every human stayed awake. They maintained daily routines. They exercised. They ate meals together. They trained constantly, but they also did other things. They played games. They watched entertainment. They talked for hours about nothing important. Observed a combat medic named leading a group of soldiers in singing. Simple songs, children's songs. The soldiers were embarrassed at first but kept going. Eventually they joined in. Their voices filled the rec room, off-key but enthusiastic. "What purpose does this serve?" asked her later. Was cleaning medical equipment. She looked up and smiled. "It serves the purpose of being human," she said. "We're not machines. We need connection, joy, even here, especially here." "But you're going to war." "Exactly," said. "Which is why we need to remember what peace feels like. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?" Reviewed data from other species. When they went to war, they focused only on war. They trained. They planned. They thought of nothing but the coming battle. Humans seemed to do the opposite. They acknowledged the war but refused to let it consume them. Weeks passed. The fleet moved through space. Watched the humans grow closer. They knew each other's names, their stories, their fears. Realized this was intentional. Humans were building something. Bonds, trust. They were becoming more than individual soldiers. They were becoming something unified. In the 5th week, a message arrived from the frontier. Video footage. The Ken had attacked a colony world. The images were horrific. Cities burning, civilians fleeing. The Ken showed no mercy. They killed everyone, even children. Expected rage from the humans. Expected discipline to break down. Expected emotion to override training. This was the pattern. When species saw atrocity, they lost control. Instead, the ship became silent. Completely, utterly silent. Found Minu in the observation deck, staring at the stars. His face was calm, but his hands were clenched into fists. Your people said, they're angry. Yes, Minu said quietly. But they're not acting angry. No, Minu said, we're not. Why? Minu turned to look at. His eyes were cold. Because anger that burns hot burns out fast. Human anger burns different. It burns cold. It burns permanent. I don't understand. You will, Minu said. The Ken think they won something by killing civilians. They think they scared us, made us weak. He looked back at the stars. They just made it personal. That was their mistake. Notice changes after that message. The humans trained harder, moved with more purpose. But they didn't lose their humanity. They still sang, still talked, still laughed. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Something had turned cold and hard and absolutely focused. They arrived at the staging ground in the 8th week. 12 other species had already gathered. Their fleets floated in formation around a dead moon. The combined force numbered 80,000 soldiers from 13 different worlds. Attended the first council meeting. The mood was grim. Admiral listened as other commanders reported. The news was all bad. The Ken had more ships than expected, more soldiers, better coordination. They outnumbered the Allied forces 3-1. We should retreat, said Commander Vex of the fleet. Regroup, wait for reinforcements. Other commanders agreed. 6 species voted to pull back. Wait for better odds, fight another day. Admiral stood. The room fell silent. The Ken are killing civilians while we talk, he said. Every hour we wait, more die. We didn't come here to watch. We came to fight. It's suicide, Vex said. 3-1 odds will be slaughtered. Possibly said, but we're going anyway. Why? Vex demanded. Why throw away lives on a battle you can't win? Looked at him. Because someone has to stand, because those are people dying, because it's the right thing to do. He paused. Because we're human and that's what we do. Watched the other species. They looked at like he was insane. Perhaps he was. Perhaps all humans were. They were volunteering for suicide, for strangers, for principle. Back on the flagship, accessed human military history, searched for patterns, found them. Thermopylae, 300 against thousands. They died, but they held. The Alamo, outnumbered 30-1. They died, but they held. Stalingrad, surrounded, starving, freezing, they held. Reservoir, trapped, outnumbered, they fought their way out. The pattern was clear. Humans didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when logic said to. They dug in. They held. They fought harder. Found in the archives, reviewing battle plans. Your species has a death wish, said. Looked up. No, she said. We have a life wish. We wish for others to live. Sometimes that means we have to be willing to die. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, said. Just not to you, not yet. The fleet prepared for battle, recorded everything, documented everything, and tried to understand why a species would march willingly toward impossible odds. The answer, suspected, was going to be written in blood. The battle began at dawn. Not that space had a dawn, but humans kept Earth time anyway. They liked their rituals, their patterns. Even facing death, they maintained routine. Was in the command center when the Ken fleet appeared. The screens filled with red markers, hundreds of ships, thousands of fighters. The swarm moved like a single organism, coordinated and deadly. 3.4-1, an officer reported. They have numerical superiority across all classes. Admiral studied the displays, his face showed nothing. Then we'll have to be 3.4 times better, he said. All ships, battle formation, execute plan Thermopylae. Had read about Thermopylae, ancient human history, a suicide stand. The plan's name told you everything about human expectations. The human fleet didn't retreat. They moved forward, taking position near a spatial anomaly that created a narrow passage. The Ken would have to come through that passage to reach the colony worlds behind. The humans would hold that passage. Or die trying. 72 hours, said. We hold for 72 hours. Reinforcements arrive then. After that, the civilians can evacuate. 72 hours, 3 days, ran the calculations. Against these odds, the human fleet would last maybe 20 hours, 40 if they were lucky. 72 was impossible. The Ken attacked. They came in waves, throwing numbers at the human position. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded. Fighters screamed past. Energy weapons lit up space like lightning. The noise was incredible even through the ship's hull. Watched a human unit commanded by defending a crucial. They were stationed on a small asteroid, holding a weapons platform that covered the passage. The Ken needed to take it. They threw everything at it. Unit held. Watched them fight when they were wounded, fight when they were exhausted, fight when their position was surrounded. Logic said they should surrender, preserve their lives. The position was lost. They didn't surrender, they fought harder. Why? Asked Minu, who was coordinating ground forces. Why don't they retreat? Because retreating means the Ken get through, Minu said. Means they reach the colonies, means more civilians die. He spoke calmly like he was explaining mathematics. So they hold. They're dying. Yes, Minu said, they know. A fighter pilot named Sora had her ship damaged in a dogfight. Watched her feed. Her cockpit was on fire. Her ejection system failed. She had seconds to live. She turned her dying ship toward a Ken carrier. For everyone back home, she said, her voice calm. Then she rammed the carrier at full speed. The explosion took out the carrier's main hangar. Hundreds of Ken fighters couldn't launch. The human line held because one pilot chose to die. Felt something break inside, some assumption about the universe. This wasn't biology. This wasn't survival instinct. This was choice. Conscious, deliberate choice. Hour 20 passed. The human fleet was still fighting. Hour 30, still fighting. Hour 40, still fighting. The Ken commanders were confused, monitored their communications. They didn't understand why the humans wouldn't break. Every species broke eventually. Every species had a point where survival instinct overrode duty. Humans appeared to have no such point. Found in a field hospital they'd set up on one of the larger ships, the room was full of wounded. Blood covered the floors. The air smelled like copper and chemicals, moved between patients, working nonstop. Her uniform was soaked red. Why don't you break? Asked. Your people, why don't they break? Looked up, her face was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her hands were steady. Because someone has to stand, she said. Someone has to hold the line, might as well be us. That's not an answer. It's the only answer, said. She went back to her patient. We're not fighting because we think we'll win. We're fighting because it's right. Because those people behind us deserve to live. Because someone has to care even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She saved the patient, moved to the next one, never stopped, never slowed. Watched her work and understood something terrible. Humans had weaponized their compassion. They'd taken the thing that should make them weak, their care for others, and made it the source of impossible strength. Hour 48. The human line should have collapsed. Computer models all said so. Every tactical analysis agreed. The position was mathematically impossible to hold. The humans held it anyway. Saw a unit down to 30% strength charge a Ken position. They were led by an infantry commander named. He was wounded. His arm hung useless. He could barely walk. He was singing. His soldiers sang with him, an old war song, about home, about brothers, about never giving up. They charged singing and the Ken position broke before them. Not because of superior weapons, not because of better tactics, because the Ken couldn't comprehend the sight of beings who should be dead, who should be broken, charging forward and singing. Fear was contagious. Saw it spreading through the Ken swarm. They'd evolved as ambush predators. They were designed to overwhelm prey quickly. When prey fought back this hard, this long, their instincts screamed danger. Hour 50, hour 60, hour 70. The Ken were starting to falter, pull back, regroup. They'd thrown everything at the humans and failed to break through. Hour 72. The reinforcements arrived. Fresh fleets from 6 species, including more humans. But by then, the battle had already turned. The Ken broke formation first. Their morale collapsed. They retreated. The humans had won. Stood in the command center, surrounded by exhausted officers, and tried to understand what had just happened. The impossible had occurred because humans refused to accept that it was impossible. Hour 73. The Ken were retreating, but they weren't destroyed. Admiral made a decision that didn't expect. Pursue them, ordered, but controlled pursuit, no unnecessary killing. We end this properly. Properly asked. The Ken had killed civilians, broken treaties. They deserved destruction. We're not executioners, said. We're soldiers, there's a difference. The human fleet moved forward. They could have slaughtered the retreating Ken. The swarm was disorganized, demoralized, broken, easy targets. Instead, the humans surrounded them, trapped them, waited. Analyzed what had happened. The numbers didn't make sense. The humans should have broken at hour 48. Every model predicted it. Every tactical computer agreed. But they'd lasted 73 hours. More than that, they'd won. Studied Ken's psychology reports, found something interesting. The Ken had evolved as ambush predators on there. They attacked in swarms, overwhelming prey with numbers. When prey fought back too hard, Ken instincts said to flee. Find easier targets. Survival over pride. Humans had evolved differently. Accessed human evolution data. Humans were persistence hunters. On their ancient world, they'd hunted by running prey to exhaustion. They couldn't outrun their targets, couldn't overpower them, but they could outlast them. They would chase for hours, days, until the prey collapsed. They'd brought that same strategy to war. They didn't try to be stronger than the Ken. They didn't try to be faster. They just refused to stop, refused to break, kept pushing, kept fighting, until the enemy collapsed first. It was horrifying in its simplicity. The Ken commanders requested a channel, accepted. The Ken Queen appeared on screen. She was massive, her chitinous body from countless battles. Her mandibles clicked in agitation. You should have broken, she said. Her voice came through the translator harsh and confused. No species can sustain that level of casualties and keep fighting. It's not possible. It's possible, said. We just proved it. Why? The Queen demanded. Why not retreat, preserve your forces, you could have lived. And let you kill more civilians, shook his head. No, that's not who we are. You're insane, the Queen said. Your entire species is insane. Maybe, agreed, but we're the insane species that just beat you. Now let's discuss terms. The surrender terms were broadcast across all channels. Listened, expected harshness, expected punishment. The Ken had committed atrocities. The terms were generous. The Ken would withdraw from all occupied territory, pay reparations to the victims, submit to monitoring, but they would keep their sovereignty, keep their ships, keep their dignity. Why? The Ken Queen asked. Why give us mercy? We showed you none. Because you showing us no mercy doesn't mean we become you, said. We can be better. We choose to be better. but saw the unspoken message underneath the words, saw it in his eyes, heard it in his tone. We could have destroyed you. We had the power. We chose mercy instead. Remember that. Remember we could have killed you all and we didn't. That was more terrifying than simple violence. It meant humans could unleash horror and choose not to. It meant they controlled their own darkness. It meant they were dangerous not because they couldn't stop fighting, but because they could. Found Minyu in the observation deck again. The battle was over, the dying was done, but Minyu still looked tense, alert. "You understand now, don't you?" Minyu asked. "I understand you won," said. "That's not what I mean." Minyu gestured at the stars. "You understand why the universe should fear us." "Should I fear you?" "I hope not," Minyu said, "but you should understand us. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, but we're the most stubborn. We're the ones who don't quit, ever. Even when you should." "Especially then," Minyu said. "That's what makes us dangerous. We'll walk into hell itself if we think it's right. We'll fight impossible battles, hold impossible positions, die for impossible causes." He looked at. "Because to us they're not impossible, they're just hard, and humans don't stop because something is hard." Watched ships moving in the darkness, humans recovering their dead, helping the wounded, even helping wounded Ken. Was out there somewhere treating enemy soldiers, was helping clear debris, was organizing supply distribution. They'd won a battle and immediately started helping. "You fight like demons," said, "then act like angels." "We're neither," Minyu said. "We're just human, that's complicated. We can be violent and kind, brutal and gentle. We can kill you, then mourn you, destroy you, then rebuild you." He paused. "We contain multitudes, that's our strength, that's our danger." Later reviewed casualty reports. The human losses were staggering, 40% casualties, thousands dead, thousands more wounded, ships destroyed, resources depleted. But they'd held. 73 hours against impossible odds. They'd held because they refused to break, because they'd weaponized stubbornness, because they'd turned their persistence into a tactical advantage. Made notes, compiled data, tried to quantify what had happened, but numbers couldn't capture it, statistics couldn't explain it. The humans had won because they were human, because their psychology was shaped by a million years of persistence hunting, because they'd evolved to outlast their prey, because they'd taken that evolution and applied it to war. They didn't fight like predators defending territory. They fought like protectors defending home. And they would march through hell itself, singing war songs and carrying pictures of loved ones before they'd let home fall. Finally understood. And was terrified. Returned to the collective 6 months after the battle. The journey home felt longer than the journey to war. Spent the time reviewing data, watching recordings, trying to make sense of what had been witnessed. The Grand Council assembled to hear the report. They filled the chamber, representatives from the collective's 12 core worlds. They expected a standard war chronicle, documentation of human military capabilities, analysis of their weapons, ships, tactics. Had prepared something different. "I have documented 47 species at war," began. "I thought I understood violence. I thought I understood what drives beings to kill. I was wrong." The council shifted. This wasn't the expected opening. "Humans don't fight like other species," continued. "They don't fight for territory. They don't fight for resources. They don't even fight for survival, not really." "Then why do they fight?" asked Elder Al. "For ideas," said. "For principles. For people they'll never meet. For concepts like justice and duty and honor. They fight because they believe it's right." Showed footage, carrying a wounded Ken soldier to safety. She was under fire. She could have left him. Instead, she risked her life for an enemy. "This is weakness," said Counselor. "Compassion in war is a liability." "That's what I thought," said, "but watch what happens next." The footage continued. Got the Ken to safety. Then she returned to combat, fought with the same intensity as before. She'd shown mercy and immediately returned to violence. Humans can switch between compassion and combat instantly, explained. They can commit terrible violence and remain human. They don't lose themselves in war. More footage, treating enemy wounded, sharing rations with displaced civilians, helping rebuild a destroyed settlement, all while still fighting, still at war. They maintain their humanity during conflict, said. Other species either become monsters or break under the pressure. Humans do neither. They stay human. This proves they're weak, Counselor insisted. Split focus, divided priorities. It proves they're strong, countered. Because they can unleash horror and choose when to stop. Because they control their violence instead of violence controlling them. Showed battle footage. The 73-hour stand. Humans fighting wounded, fighting exhausted, fighting when every tactical model said they should surrender. They don't break, said. That's their primary weapon, not their technology, not their tactics, their refusal to break. Suicide impulses, someone muttered. No, said firmly. Survival impulses, just different from ours. Humans understand something we don't. Sometimes you survive by refusing to run. Sometimes the only way to live is to be willing to die. Presented psychological analysis. Humans bond with everything, each other species, animals, even their weapons and ships. They give them names, form emotional attachments. This makes them vulnerable to emotional manipulation, but it also makes them incredibly unified. They fight not as individuals but as a collective bound by emotional ties. More data, human military history, thousands of years of warfare. They've been at war with themselves for their entire history, explained. They've perfected violence through practice, but they've also perfected recovery, rebuilding, forgiveness. They know how to destroy and how to heal. Elder Al leaned forward. What are you saying, chronicler, that humans are a threat? I'm saying humans are complicated, replied. They're the only species that combines unlimited violence capacity with ethical frameworks. They can destroy entire civilizations and then help them rebuild. They can hold grudges for generations and forgive in an instant. They're contradictions. Showed the surrender terms, the mercy given to the kin. They had the power to annihilate their enemy. They chose not to. That's more frightening than if they'd killed them all. How? Asked the counselor. Because it means they're in control, said. It means they choose their actions deliberately. They're not driven by instinct or emotion. They can commit atrocity and stop precisely when they decide to stop. Presented the final analysis. Humans remember everything, every alliance, every betrayal, every sacrifice. They keep records going back thousands of years. They don't forget. If you help them, they remember. If you betray them, they remember that too. They hold grudges. They hold memories, corrected. Which is worse? A grudge is emotional, a memory is factual. You can appeal to emotion, you can't argue with facts. The chamber was quiet. Let the silence build. My recommendation to the council is simple, said. Never betray humanity. Never threaten their loved ones. Never assume they'll break. Never assume they'll be merciful. Never assume they'll be cruel. Never assume anything about them. Because they're unpredictable, Elder Al asked. Because they're human, said, and that means they're capable of anything. Good or evil, creation or destruction, mercy or vengeance. They contain all possibilities. Showed one final image, squad after the battle. They were wounded, exhausted, covered in blood and dirt. But they were smiling, laughing, alive. They walked through hell, said, and they kept walking. That's what makes them terrifying. Not that they're strong or smart or well-armed, but that they simply don't stop. They can stare into the abyss and keep walking. They can face impossible odds and fight anyway. They can die for strangers and call it duty. The universe fears them, continued, because they're the only species that turned evolution's persistence into tactical doctrine. They're hunters who never stop hunting. They're protectors who never stop protecting. They're the only species that can march to war singing songs about home. Elder Al sat back. What do you suggest we do, Chronicler? Become their allies, said immediately. Because if humans are on your side, you cannot lose. They'll hold any line, fight any battle, die for you if they believe you're worth it. But they'll also hold you accountable, expect honor from you. They'll judge you by their standards. And if we can't meet those standards, then stay out of their way, said. Because if you become their enemy, they'll march through hell to defeat you. And unlike other species, they won't stop when it gets hard. They'll keep marching. Close the report. 47 species I've documented at war. 47 species that fight when they must and stop when they can. Humans are the 48th. They fight when they should and stop when they choose. That makes them different. That makes them dangerous. That makes them human. The Council voted unanimously to strengthen ties with humanity, to never threaten them, to honor their treaties. Because had shown them the truth. The universe fears humans not because they're monsters, but because they're not. Because they're just humans, complicated and contradictory and absolutely unstoppable, marching through the darkness with songs on their lips and love in their hearts, and an infinite capacity for both violence and mercy. And once they start marching, nothing in the universe can make them stop. Nothing except themselves.